In this bonus lecture, we're going to learn a little bit about passing variables from one procedure to another, and there's a couple different ways you can do that. One is called ByVal, or by value, and one is called ByRef. And you may have seen these, but I'm going to show you how to use them. So the first sub we're going to create is we're just going to call it simply the calling sub. And this procedure is going to call another procedure to do a little math or changes to the sub, and then it'll go right back to this one at the end. So we're going to start real simple. A is 10, B is going to be, let's say, 20. Keep it very simple. And then let's go ahead and create, just planning ahead, we're going to create our other procedure it's going to be called sub. So we have the one that's doing the calling, and we have the one that is being called upon. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple parameters for the variables here. So for example, we're going to say ByVal y, and we're going to have ByVal z, and I'm going to show you how that works. So let's go ahead and create, normally whenever you're calling a sub, you would just do something like this, called sub, right? And that's all you'd need to do, and it would trigger another procedure. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw some variables into the mix. We want to throw A, the value 10, and we want to throw B, the value 20, into our other procedure without having to create a public variable. So we're going to say called sub, and then we're going to say A, comma, B. You could also do Y equals A and Z equals colon equals B, and I'll show you that method in a moment. But let's get to the good part here. So in a moment, we'll create a message box that'll show you the different methods. Right now we're going to do ByVal. That means that the value 10 is going to show up here in the first position, and since we have B in the second comma position, so the value 20 would show up in this case it would be called Z. So let's go ahead and hit F8 and debug through. So A is 10, we see that B is now 20, and so we're going to run called sub with the first position receiving the value of 10 and the second position receiving the value of 20. So if I hit F8, now we're temporarily moved over to the new procedure called sub. So let's do a little changeroo here. We're going to say Y is going to be equal to 100 now, and Z is going to be equal to 200. Now before I proceed, I just want to show you, as I hit F8, I'm not going to run this line or the next line. I want to show you by hovering. So Y is equal to 10, right? And Z is equal to 20. So we've just passed the values 10 in the first position and 20 in the second position by using these parameters and by telling the called sub to expect these parameters to be passed in the first and second comma separated position. Really powerful, right? The cool thing about this is you can either return, you can actually return the new value 100 and 200 back using the ByRef, or if you just want to give just a value of 10 and 20 and do something with it, but not return it back to the original. So I'm going to show you both ways. First, I'm going to hit F8, F8. So we know that Y and Z were 10 and 20, and now they're 100 and 200. So if I hit F8, because this is ByVal, if I hit F8 and I return back, let's do a little message box. Message box. We're going to say, quote, A is now, space, end quote. And we'll do an ampersand. We'll say A. And B is, and join that to the variable B. So here's our message box. Let's just scooch that up here. So I'm going to hit F8. So the message box is kind of squinty. A is now 10 and B is 20. Right? So they didn't really change, did they? I mean, we threw the values in the other procedure that we called, and you know, it accepted those values as if we want to do multiplication or manipulation of those values, but then we changed them to 100 and 200, and boy, they're sure not 100 and 200 anymore. They're back to their original values. That's because we passed them by value and not by reference. So I know you're getting bored. Let's go ahead and change the first one to be ByRef, which means that although it'll receive the value of 10, If it's changed to something else, for example 100, why, it will return back the new value because it's by reference. So that y, which will then be a because it was the first of the two parameters, a is going to then be 100 and b will stay what it is because it's by value. So just remember, by reference, the referencing value could change. By value, you're only passing the value 20 or whatever to be used for that procedure, but it won't affect your original b or whatever you put in there. So let's try this again. So a is 10, b is 20. You know the routine. The first parameter is going to be 10 and 20. So now this one is 10 and this one is, sure enough, is 20 now. But y is 100, z is 200, and when we end that sub, we now see that a is 100 because it was passed by reference, and b is still 20. So here's our message box now. A is now 100, and b is still 20 because it was passed by value only. So that is how to pass a parameter. And as we promised, I'll show you the other way to phrase that if you want. Basically, you can phrase this a little bit differently. So if you're expecting the procedure to have a y and a z, or whatever your variables are going to be called, you could be very specific and say y colon equals a, comma, z in the new procedure is going to equal b, and it would do the same thing. So let's just run it really quick. So I hit the run button, a is now 100 and b is 20, just as we expected. So I'm going to save this workbook, and guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to let you go ahead and download this. If you'll just click on the download section over to your upper right hand, you'll see a little down arrow with a line. That means you can download this workbook directly from this lecture that you're watching right now. So I hope you enjoyed that. See you later.